Programming is a 21st century skill that everyone should learn. I am Vigar, and today I'm gonna give you some tips on how to get started with programming and also how to pick your first language. Programming is a huge field with a lot of misconceptions. The biggest one being that you have to be a genius in order to learn how to program. And that is not true at all. The only thing you really need to know is basic math. Programming is 100% built on logic. If you have a logical and rational mind, it's gonna help you out a lot. But what is actually programming? Well, programming is basically creating an algorithm or a set of instructions that tells someone or something what to do and in what order to do them. An example of a program or an algorithm is a recipe for baking a cake. What it basically is a set of instructions that tells you what to do and in what order you should do it. And if you follow the instructions, you will get what you desire, which is a cake. And then the algorithm or the program is coded in a way that a baker or a human can understand it. So the recipe is the language that is used to express the algorithm, the set of instructions, so that the subject is able to understand what it means. So that is actually what programming is. But today I'm going to talk about computer programming, which is most likely what you thought about when you clicked on this video. And computer programming is the exact same thing, except you write code that a computer can understand so that the computer can execute your algorithm, your set of instructions. So now that we know what programming is, let's look at how to learn it. In order to learn programming, you're going to need some tools. These tools are languages. These languages are basically how you can communicate with the computer. It is the language you have to use with the computer in order for it to understand you. There are a lot of different languages out there, and there are probably a lot of people telling you that you should get started with this language or this language and giving you a lot of reasons why that language is their favorite. And that is good. It's great. You should do some research on the different languages that are out there and what they are used for, and then you should make a decision based on that. But I'm gonna give you some tips on what languages to start with, and I'm gonna feature 5 languages in this video. The first language is catering towards the younger ones. If you are 12, 13 or under, you should take a look at Scratch. Scratch is a visual programming language, which means that you are working with blocks and block diagrams, which means you don't really have to do a lot of writing advanced code. It's basically a drag and drop. Like you're basically building something with a lot of building blocks, and then the computer is able to understand it. It's going to give you a very good understanding of how programming works and how programs are structured, although you don't really learn necessarily how exactly to write code in a specific written language, but you learn the essentials of programming. One of the best resources for Scratch is code.org. They have classes for kids from the age of 4 and all the way up to high school. And if you go and check out code.org, you're going to see that a lot of big people are endorsing that program. People like Mark Zuckerberg, the guy that invented Facebook, is endorsing code.org for being a great site for teaching kids to program. Another great way to get into visual programming is taking a look at a robotics kit like the NXT from Lego Mindstorm. It's a Lego robot that you can use Scratch and you can use any written language to program it, but it has a really nice and intuitive block diagram language that is going to allow you to program any kind of robot that you make with the NXT or any other robotics kit, really. So that is what I think you should get started with if you are a bit younger and don't really want to deal with the very complicated code and all the intimidating code and syntax that you've seen. If you just want to deal with block diagrams, Scratch and perhaps a robotics kit is going to help you a lot. Now, the 4 other languages I'm going to talk about are so-called written languages. They are more traditional languages, and you've probably heard about a lot of them. And the 4 I'm going to feature in this video is going to be PHP, Python, Java, and C++. And I'm going to start out with PHP, because PHP kind of stands out from the other ones. PHP is a general purpose language, which basically means it has a lot of use cases. You can use it to create a lot of different types of programs. But what PHP is specialized on is server-side scripting and web development. So if you want to get into web development, I would suggest picking up PHP. I personally do not know PHP that well, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I'm just want to say that if you want to get into web development, you should take a look at PHP and JavaScript. Those are great general purpose programming languages, and it's gonna teach you how to program a bit better than if you want to start out with CSS and HTML, which, yes, they are programming languages, but they are more markup languages, which means you don't deal with the same kinds of functions and operations that you do within a general purpose language like PHP. The three other languages are three of the absolutely biggest languages out there. And that is basically why they are on this list, because they are the biggest, which means you are going to find a lot of resources for them. And there are so many use cases for these three languages: Python, Java, and C++. Python is what we call a high-level programming language. Java is a bit lower, and C++ it's not really a low-level programming language, but it is lower than Java and Python. And basically what it means is that you have more direct communication with the hardware. You have, for example, you have access to memory. It's basically the closer you get to writing machine code, getting to writing ones and zeros, the lower you get. And of course, it usually gets a lot more difficult and a lot more advanced when you go to a lower level programming language. So one of the great things with C++ is that it is cross-platform. You just use another compiler and it's going to run on mostly everything, and it is used in a lot of different programs. Your favorite game is most likely written in C++ and a lot of other languages, but mostly C++, and that's because C++ is made specifically for large systems and systems that require a lot of efficiency. And that is why I think C++ is kind of the worst, not really a bad language to start with, but out of the three I'm talking about right now, it is the worst to start out with, basically because it is made for large systems for efficiency, and it is a very advanced and complex language that gives you a lot of lower level access, like for example memory allocation. And memory allocation is not necessarily what you want to deal with when you're trying to create your first calculator. And I'm guessing you're not gonna write a gigantic several tens of thousands of lines of codes program right off the bat. So I think since C++ is based more towards large and huge systems, you should avoid it for starting with, but it is definitely a language that a lot of people should look at. Java is a language that is very close to C++, at least in how the syntax works, basically how like the grammar of the language. The only difference is that it is a bit higher level. You don't really have the same lower level access as C++, like you do not have specific memory allocation access, but you do have a lot of the other necessary functions to create a large system. But one of the most important things with Java is the most important thing about Java is their emphasis on what they call WORA, which is write once, run anywhere, which basically means that when you create a program in Java, it's going to run on basically everything. And that is because Java is using something called the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine, which is a piece of code that you install on your computer, and it is necessary to compile and interpret the code so that the machine can understand it. And because of the emphasis on WORA and the JVM, your fridge, your oven, the parking system, like a lot of what I would call dumb system, like your refrigerator, are running Java, because you can just install a Java virtual machine on it and it's gonna run any Java code. And that is what really makes Java great, is that it runs on absolutely everything. The syntax is very close to C++, but it is a bit easier to get into because it is more forgiving when it comes to the lower level access. You do not have to deal with memory leakage and memory allocation. You can just write your programs and just deal with learning how to program. If you want to start out with Java or C++, I suggest picking up a book. I started out with Java, and this is one of the books I picked up. It's a Java all-in-one for dummies. And I also suggest picking up the Learning How to Program with Java for Dummies, which is actually, it is the book that taught me how to program. Now moving on to Python. Python is a higher level program. It is way higher level than Java and C++. It is a general purpose language, so it is usable for mostly anything. But what Python really emphasizes on is readability. The syntax is very close to English. It is very easy to understand, and it's very easy to get into. But that is also what I would look at as one of the downsides. Although it's very great for beginners, it's also kind of bad for beginners, because when you want to move over to something with a bit more advanced syntax like Java or C++, you might be struggling a bit, because then you're not dealing with a compiler or an interpreter that is that forgiving when it comes to, for example, variable declaration and syntax for things like for loops. But Python is great for stuff at a bit smaller scale, and it is very easy if you don't want to deal with advanced syntax right off the bat. So generally, Python is a higher level language that is a bit easier to read, and it works well at a bit smaller scale. Java has a bit more advanced syntax, works at a bigger scale, and runs on absolutely everything. C++ is made for efficiency and huge systems, and runs on mostly everything as well, and has a very complicated syntax, and you get a lot of the low level access like memory allocation. And then you basically have to figure out what is the best for you. Do you want to get right into the hardcore stuff like memory allocation and all that? Then go ahead, pick C++. But if you want to get a smoother start, I would suggest picking up Python, because Python has the easiest syntax, and you can do basically everything you can do in C++ and Java, you can do in Python when you work at a beginner level. So generally, when it comes to finding resources for learning programming, I suggest looking at written published material, like picking up a book. But then don't pick up a book that says like getting started with Python or getting started with Java, because most likely that book is gonna just teach you how to write code in Java or Python or C++ or whatever. It's not actually gonna teach you how to program. It's gonna assume that you already know programming, but you just want to pick up a new language. So what you want to do is you want to pick up a book that says how to get started with programming in and then the language you want. For example, the Getting Started with Programming in Java for Dummies. There are also a lot of great resources online like Stack Overflow, Codecademy, Udacity, and Lynda. But what I don't suggest you do is go follow some random series on YouTube, because you're most likely gonna miss out on some of the key things when it comes to programming, because you're not gonna learn a lot by just copying whatever a guy on YouTube is typing on the screen. Pick up a book, do exercises, and write code, and just write programs. It's gonna be a bit difficult in the beginning, and that is normal. Programming is something that grows on you. It is a bit like math. Math is very difficult in the beginning, but then when you start to get the hang of it, it just gets easier and easier and easier. It takes a lot of years to become a good programmer, a lot of practice. And if you want to get a bit more technical and look at more theory behind programming, you should definitely take a look at discrete mathematics. I have like a short playlist with 4 videos on Boolean logic. I'm gonna link it right up there that you can check out. It's just some basic Boolean logic, which is kind of an introduction to discrete mathematics. If you want to go check it out and learn some of the more advanced techniques that lies behind programming and constructing algorithms. But that's it for this video. If you liked it, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. I'm gonna link some videos just around here, and you can like click this button right there if you want to subscribe to the channel. So I really hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.